Leo, September feels like one of those months where you can tell something has already changed in you, even if you haven't completely worked out what that means yet. Because you're coming straight out of that solar eclipse in Leo from August, and that eclipse was very much about you, your identity, your direction, the way you see yourself, even the way you want other people to see you. So I don't think September is necessarily the month where this new chapter begins. I think it already has. September is more about looking around at your life and asking, okay, if I'm becoming this version of myself, what actually still fits? And Jupiter is still moving through Leo as well, which makes everything around you feel bigger. Your confidence can grow, your ambitions can grow. You may be wanting more from your life than you did even a few months ago. But there's something interesting happening at the same time because Mars spends most of September tucked away in Cancer, behind the scenes in your 12th house. So you've got this part of you that wants to expand, wants to move, wants to be seen. But another part of you may still be processing something privately. You could be finishing something, healing something, working through frustrations you haven't really spoken about, or even preparing for something that other people don't know about yet. And I actually think that matters because by the end of September, Mars moves into Leo and the energy changes completely. That's when we go from thinking about the next version of your life to actually doing something about it. So I almost see the beginning and end of this month as two completely different versions of Leo. At the beginning, you're still figuring it out. By the end, you're much more ready to act. But before you get there, September puts a big spotlight on your value. The Virgo new moon is activating your second house. So money, work, income, your skills, what you own, what you're building, but also your relationship with your own worth, it all comes into focus. And this can be really practical. Maybe you want to earn more. Maybe you're looking at where your money is actually going. Maybe you're realizing that something you've been giving your time or energy to simply isn't worth what it costs you anymore. And that could be emotional too, because Venus moving through Scorpio starts activating your home, family, and private life, while Pluto continues its much longer transformation of your relationships. So September may show you very clearly where your life needs to recognize itself around the person you're becoming, who still fits, what still feels like home, which relationships can grow with you, and which dynamics are starting to feel too small, too heavy, or just not right anymore. Then towards the end of the month, their energy starts opening outward again. Communication becomes more important. Conversations, decisions, ideas, things you need to say, maybe even something you've been sitting on for a while. And then we get the Aries full moon lighting up your 9th house. This is your bigger picture, your future. Think travel, study, spirituality, purpose, beliefs, the direction you actually want your life to go in. So by the time we reach the end of September, I think Leo could be looking at their life from a much wider perspective than they were at the start of the month. Not just what do I want right now, but where is all of this actually taking me? And with Mars finally moving into your sign at almost exactly the same time, there's this sense that once something becomes clear, you're not going to want to sit around thinking about it forever. You're going to want to move. So that's where I want to start with the tarot. Because before we get into everything happening underneath the surface, I want to know what this new chapter is actually asking of you. What is beginning to take shape in Leo's life right now? Okay, Leo, this is interesting because the first card out is the Four of Wands. And as I was asking that question, 444 was literally showing on my camera. So I'm taking that as a little extra emphasis on this idea of building something solid. Because the Four of Wands is stability. It can be home, relationships, community, milestones, something finally feeling established. And I really like that after all of that Leo eclipse energy, because this doesn't feel like you're just changing for the sake of changing. And I really like that after all of that Leo eclipse energy, because this doesn't feel like you're changing for the sake of changing. It feels like you're trying to create a life that actually fits you better. But then we have the Knight of Swords and the Five of Wands. So getting there might not feel especially calm. There's this urgency around you. You may feel like once you know what you want to move on it immediately. There could be a conversation you need to have, a decision you need to make, or something you're suddenly very determined to pursue. And I also think some of you are just done arguing with yourself, done going backwards and forwards, maybe even done dealing with a person or situation that constantly turns everything into a battle. Because the Five of Swords is where I start asking whether something has become more about fighting than actually getting anywhere. And that's interesting, because what's beginning to take shape for you looks stable. The Four of Wands isn't chaos. So if you're moving towards more peace, more security, more certainty in your life, there may be something you can't keep fighting with and carrying into that at the same time. And the Knight of Swords makes me feel like September could bring a moment where you finally say, enough, I know what I'm doing now. But that also makes me want to know what could make this harder than it needs to be. Because if the Four of Wands is what you're building towards, what is pushing against that stability for Leo right now? Okay, FYI, my daughter scratched my eye yesterday and took a chunk out of my eyeball, so I'm in pain and I'm on struggle street, but bear with me. Okay, this makes a lot of sense, Leo. We've got the Queen of Pentacles, the Seven of Cups, the Knight of Pentacles, and Judgment. So straight away, I feel like what's pushing against that stability isn't necessarily that you can't have it. Is that you may be looking at too many different versions of what your life could be. The Seven of Cups can bring options, possibilities, different paths, but it can also bring confusion. And with the Queen and Knight of Pentacles on either side of it, I feel like part of you is trying to be really sensible about everything. You want to make the mature choice, the stable choice. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with that, Leo. But I almost wonder if some of you have become so focused on choosing the safest or most responsible path that you're struggling to hear what you actually want, because then Judgment comes in. And Judgment's not a small card, Leo. That's one of those cards that says you already know something that has to change. There's a calling here. There's a decision that feels bigger than just which option is easiest. And I actually think this is tying right back into what we were talking about astrologically. You're becoming a different version of yourself. So naturally, the decisions you make now can't always be based on what would have made sense for the old you. And I think that's the tension. One part of you wants certainty. One part of you wants to know exactly how everything is going to work before you move. But another part of you is waking up and going, I can't keep choosing my life based purely on what feels safe. And with the Knight of Pentacles here, I don't think this is asking you to do something reckless. It's actually the opposite. Move carefully, build properly, take your time. But don't confuse moving carefully with never moving at all, because Judgment feels like there's something in September that you're being asked to answer. A choice, a direction, maybe even a version of yourself that you know you're ready to step into. And that brings me to what I want to look at next. Because if part of the struggle is trying to make the right choice on the surface, what's actually happening underneath all of this for Leo? Okay, underneath all of this, we've got the King of Swords, the Fool, and the Ten of Swords. Honestly, I think part of you has already made a decision that the rest of you is still catching up with. The King of Swords is very clear-headed. He cuts through emotion, noise, other people's opinions, all of the but what ifs, and looks at what is actually true. And sitting next to it is the Fool. There's this feeling of wanting a completely fresh start, not necessarily because you know exactly where it's going to lead, but because you know you can't keep doing things the way you've been doing them. And then we have the Ten of Swords. So something here feels unfinished. maybe it's a situation, maybe it's a way of thinking, maybe it's a version of your life that you kept trying to make work because you'd already invested so much into it. But the Ten of Swords is that point where you stop trying to revive something that has already run its course. And I actually think that's why the Seven of Cups came out before. Because when you finally accept that one path is over, suddenly all these other possibilities open up, which can feel exciting, but also really uncomfortable because now you have to choose. And the Fool doesn't give you a 5-year plan. The Fool just says you know enough to take the first step. That's where the King of Swords becomes really important, because I don't see you blindly jumping into something here. There's actually a lot of discernment around this. You're looking at your life differently. You're becoming much more honest about what is working, what isn't, and what you're no longer willing to drag forward just because it's familiar. And I think September may be the month where something you've mentally known for a while finally becomes impossible to ignore, because you can see the new beginning now. You just have to be willing to let the ending actually be an ending. And if you are leaving something behind and stepping into something new, I want to look at that part of September that deals with your security, your money, your value, what you're building, and what actually feels worth your energy now. What is changing around Leo's money, stability, or sense of self-worth this September? Okay, this is interesting because we've got 2 sevens here with the 7 of Swords and the 7 of Pentacles. And then the Knight of Pentacles has also come out again as well. I really don't think September is asking you to throw everything at the wall and hope something sticks. It feels much more calculated than that. So the 7 of Swords can be about being selective with what you share, protecting your plans, moving quietly, not feeling like everybody needs to know exactly what you're doing before it's ready. And then the 7 of Pentacles is almost like you stopping to look at where your time, money, and effort have actually been going and asking, is this giving me enough back? Because you can work really hard at something and still eventually realize this isn't worth what I'm putting into it anymore. And having 2 sevens together makes me feel like there's a real period of evaluation happening here. You're not necessarily rushing to change everything overnight. You're observing. You're looking at what's working, what's draining you, what still has potential, and what maybe needs a different approach. Then we have the Knight of Pentacles again, which I love because it keeps reinforcing that whatever you're building next, you're meant to build it properly. There's no need to panic because it isn't happening fast enough. There's no need to make huge impulsive moves just to feel like something is happening. It's more like be smart, be consistent, and stop wasting energy where there's no return. And honestly, that could apply to money, work, your confidence, even people, because the more I look at this reading, the more it feels like September is making you much more protective of where your energy goes. And that actually leads perfectly into the next part of your astrology, because your home life and relationships are starting to become really important too. So I want to look at that next. What is Leo beginning to realize about their relationships, home life, or the people closest to them? Okay, this feels a little more personal. So we've got the 3 of Swords, the 2 of Pentacles, and the Queen of Swords. And I feel like some of you have been trying to manage something that has actually been hurting you for longer than you admit. So the 2 of Pentacles is that energy of keeping everything moving, adjusting, accommodating, trying to make it work, telling yourself you can handle it. But sitting between it are the 3 of Swords and the Queen of Swords. I don't think you can keep juggling this forever. There may be a relationship, family situation, friendship, even something within the home where you've been trying to keep the peace or adapt around somebody else while quietly carrying the emotional weight of it. And the Queen of Swords feels like the point where you stop doing that. Not necessarily in some huge dramatic way. It's more like you suddenly get very clear. This is hurting me. This isn't working. I need something to change here. And I find it interesting that we had the King of Swords underneath everything earlier, And now we have his queen. There's a lot of mental clarity coming into this reading. Almost like September is helping you separate what you wish a situation could be from what it actually is. And that doesn't automatically mean cutting someone out. For some of you, it could simply mean having a conversation you've avoided, changing a boundary, changing the way you respond, or deciding that you're no longer going to be the person constantly keeping everything balanced. Because the Queen of Swords can care deeply and still say, this is where my line is. And I think once you make that distinction, something starts becoming much easier to navigate. So now I want to zoom back out. We've looked at what's changing, what's underneath it, where your energy is going, and what's happening around the people closest to you. Where is all of this ultimately taking Leo by the end of September? Okay, this is pretty telling because the Seven of Swords and the King of Swords have both come back again. And now we've got the Magician sitting between them. So where is all of this taking you? Into a position where you're actually calling the shots again. So the Seven of Swords here feels less like secrecy and more like knowing when to move quietly. Not every plan needs to be announced. Not every decision needs everybody else's input. There's something about trusting your own strategy and keeping your focus on what you're trying to create. And then the Magician comes in right in the middle of this spread. That's the shift. Because the Magician is the point where you stop looking at all the different possibilities and start doing something with what you already have. Think your skills, your ideas, your voice, your experience, whatever resources are already sitting in front of you. And I think that's important after the Seven of Cups we had earlier, because at the beginning there were all these possible directions. By the end of September, that energy feels much more concentrated. It's less what could I do and more this is what I'm doing. Then we finish with the King of Swords again. And I really like that he's repeated because he showed up underneath everything when we were talking about that ending and new beginning. Now he's showing up in where this is heading. So whatever clarity was starting to form internally at the beginning of the reading looks like it becomes something you're actually prepared to stand behind. You're making decisions differently. You're thinking further ahead, and you're much less interested in being pulled in different directions by other people, fear, or uncertainty. That feels very aligned with Mars moving into Leo at the end of the month too. There's a point where all of this reflection stops being reflection and turns into action. And before we get to that end of month culmination, I want to go back to the Virgo new moon because that's giving you an opportunity to plant something new around money, security, and self-worth. So Leo, what are you being asked to build or begin under the Virgo new moon? Oh, okay. We've got the Six of Pentacles, the Hanged Man, and the Three of Swords again. So I don't actually think this new moon is asking you to build more in the usual sense. I think it's asking you to change the way you give. So the Six of Pentacles is all about exchange, what you give, what you receive, whether something is actually balanced. And with the Hanged Man sitting right beside it, there's a pause here, a chance to look at something differently before you keep pouring more of yourself into it. Because then the Three of Swords comes back. And we already saw this card when we looked at your relationships and the people closest to you. So I don't think that's accidental. There may be something you've been giving to, your time, your money, your effort, your emotional energy, because you hoped it eventually would become more balanced. And maybe September is where you finally ask, is it actually? Are you getting enough back? Are you constantly the one adjusting? Are you investing in something because it genuinely has potential or because you don't want to admit how much it's already taken out of you? The Hanged Man doesn't rush the answer. It just asks you to stop long enough to see it properly. And because this is happening around your second house, so money, value, self-worth, I think there's a much bigger lesson here about what you consider worthy of your energy. You don't have to keep proving your value by how much you can give. And maybe that's actually where what you're planting under this new moon, a healthier standard for what you allow yourself to invest in. Because once that changes, the decisions around money, work, and relationships, all of it starts changing with it. And then we come into the Aries full moon at the end of the month, which is much more about the bigger picture, your direction, your beliefs, where you're actually trying to go from here. So let's see what's coming to a head. What is the Aries full moon revealing or bringing to completion for Leo? Okay, this feels like a really nice shift, Leo. We've got the Queen of Pentacles again, the Page of Cups, and the Knight of Wands. And I think this full moon is showing you what happens once you stop pouring energy into the wrong places. So the Queen of Pentacles has already come up in this reading. There's still that strong theme around stability, security, and building a life that actually supports you. But then the Page of Cups comes in and softens everything. There's curiosity here, a new idea, a new feeling, maybe even something that catches you off guard because it makes you feel excited again. And then the Knight of Wands is like, right, let's go. That feels so aligned with Mars moving into Leo right at the end of the month, because the whole reading has had this build-up of thinking, reassessing, pulling your energy back, getting clear. And now suddenly there's movement. The Knight of Wands doesn't want to sit around analysing something forever. He wants to experience it. He wants to follow the spark. And because this full moon is happening in your 9th house, I think for some of you, this could be about a bigger direction opening up. So think travel, study, spirituality, a creative path, a new belief about what your life could look like. Something starts to feel possible again. And I actually like the Queen of Pentacles sitting at the beginning because it tells me this doesn't have to be some wild, irresponsible leap. You can be grounded and still be adventurous. You can build something stable and still follow what excites you. You don't have to choose between security and feeling alive, and maybe that's what this full moon is really revealing. The path forward doesn't have to look like the one you would have chosen before. It just has to feel like yours. So before I bring all of this together, I want to pull your Oracle card. What does Leo need to know most as they move through September? Okay, Leo, you had one card come out, which was acceptance, letting go, water, non-resistance. And the message on this card is really simple. You can let go now. You don't have to keep wrestling with something just because you wanted it to turn out differently. You don't have to keep trying to control exactly how the next chapter unfolds either. There's a real surrender energy around this card. What will be, will be. And I don't mean that in a passive way, like you just sit there and let life happen to you. It's more about recognizing the difference between something you can change and something you're exhausting yourself trying to hold together. Because sometimes the moment you stop resisting an ending, you realize that ending was also creating space for the beginning. And that feels really important in your reading. We had the 10 of Swords with the Fool. We had Judgment. We had the 3 of Swords repeating. There has been so many little moments throughout this reading saying something is ready to be left where it belongs. And I think September becomes easier when you stop asking how you can keep everything exactly as it was while also becoming somebody completely different. Because you probably can't, and that's okay. There's also quite literally water on this card, so for some of you, spending time near the ocean, a river, a lake, even just around water more intentionally could help you clear your head and process some of this, especially because so much of the first part of September feels quite internal for you. But the bigger message is this: stop fighting the current. You don't need to know exactly where it's taking you yet. When I look at this reading as a whole, Leo, I think September is a month of getting very clear about what deserves to come with you, because you're not starting from scratch here. Something has already shifted. But at the beginning of the month, I think you're still working out what that shift actually means for your real life. Where does your energy go now? What are you building? Which relationships still feel right? What are you giving too much to? And what are you finally ready to stop carrying? The repeated Pentacles tells me you're trying to create something solid. The repeated Swords tells me a lot of that begins with a decision. And then by the end of the reading, we start getting the Magician, the Page of Cups, the Knight of Wands. That's where the energy starts moving again. So I don't think September is about forcing yourself to have everything figured out on day one. It's about clearing enough space that when you do know what you want, you can actually go after it. And by the end of the month, I think a lot of you are going to feel much more ready to do exactly that. And that is everything I have for you, Leo. If this reading resonated with you, let me know in the comments what part of it stood out the most. But if you'd like to be here for your October reading and everything we do in between, I invite you to subscribe and join our little collective here. I would absolutely love to have your energy as part of it, and it just helps this channel to grow and to spread the messages that I want to share. And Leo, whatever September brings you, let what's finished be finished. There's something else trying to begin. Sending you all of my love and positive energy, and I hope to see you in the next reading.